In your view, from what you see a lot of kids in your ministry. What is unique about boys? Are there some things that are unique?
That's a good question, because anything that I say that's unique about boys, a girl mom will go, well, but my girl is like that, right? So
Yeah.
anything I say is really going to be a stereotype. So my boys probably roughhouse more than the average girl, but there will be some girls that like to roughhouse. There
Mhm.
are some boys who like to write, some don't, some like to climb and kick balls, and others will happily do puzzles for hours.
Mhm.
So I have noticed, however, that my boys do push, throw, climb, yell, and make a lot of messes. And if I had a nickel for every time I said, our house is not a jungle gym or your brother is not a toy, I would be like on a Hawaiian vacation right now. In fact, here's a funny story. Our oldest, when he was about 4 or 5, he was so rough with his little brother that we had to keep telling him, Oliver is a person, not a toy. And so after a while, Oliver called himself Oliver Person. He thought that was his name because we had to
Oh,
say that so often.
that's so funny. Oh, that's great.
I
Yeah.
do think, however, that raising boys in today's world, whether they're stereotypical boys or not, I think it gives us a unique chance to raise the kind of men of integrity that our world
Mhm.
really needs. For better or for worse, men have a lot of influence.
Mhm.
And so we get to raise the kind of boys that we want to see leading our world. And we do hope that, as my boys grow, it might be a little bit more even distribution of leadership. But I don't think that our world is ever going to be completely equal, women in leadership, men in leadership. So
Mhm.
especially at this point, my boys still will have a lot of influence. So
Mhm.
I am really glad to have been given 3 chances to raise the kind of men that our world needs to see. Men
That's
who are
wonderful.
selfless and men of integrity who will help raise up those with no voice. That's what I hope that I'm raising them to be.
Oh, I love that. And when that is your hope and your desire, you're going to do things to move in that direction. And
Yeah.
that's what I'd like to talk maybe about some today is what can you do to raise men of integrity?
Mm.
That's fabulous. In a situation where it can get out of control really quickly, there has to be some kind of boundary. So
Mm-hmm.
that sounds really good. I like that.
Yeah. And I
Thanks.
think it has impact further down the line too. If they learn when they're 5, 6, 7, 11, 12, that when somebody says no, you stop,
Mhm.
then they're not going to be the kind of guys who hurt women.
Yeah, that's really, really good because we want to raise young men that will respect women.
Yeah,
So, yeah,
absolutely.
that's so good. Okay, you are very much an, I don't know, authority, whether you know it or not. People listen to you and you have a lot of wonderful advice. And how do you approach for both fathers and mothers in raising their kids to grow in spiritual maturity? What do you have some thoughts on an overview? And then I want to get into some specifics about your ministry too. But
For sure.
yeah.
Well, I really believe that the growth in spiritual maturity happens over time. So first of all, I always say, like, it's God's job to soften our children's hearts. It is not our job to soften our hearts. There are things that we can do. Like, if you think of the parable of the sower, our job is to cultivate the soil so that when the seed falls, it falls on healthy soil that isn't full of weeds and rocks, so that then our kids can grow up. There's no guarantees when we're raising our children to be men and women of faith. They still have to just make those decisions on their own, but we can make it a lot more likely that they'll choose that if they have the information they need and they've had a good relationship with us and they know what it looks like to talk to God about their questions, and they know how to find people when they do have questions. They know how to find people that can answer them.
Mhm.
So we are cultivating that soil. We're making it nice and soft and weed free. And so that is what I believe that we are doing as parents, not imparting all the information,
Mhm.
because we can never impart all the information. Faith is a lifelong journey, right?
Right, right.
There isn't like, I don't believe that there's like specific like catechism or something that kids like desperately need to know before they leave the house. I think they need your love. They need your willingness to listen, and they need you to teach what you're learning as well.
Mm.
So there are obviously things that we want to teach them, but it's not just about imparting information.
No,
It is also,
information.
mhm.
Yeah, information doesn't make their heart prepared to really trust Jesus either. We really need a heart change rather than information filling our brains. We need our heart to be soft and to be moved.
And there is information that helps with that process, but it really, in the end, they have to be willing to let God soften their hearts. You know, it says in Ezekiel, God says, I'm going to take your heart of stone and put in you a heart of flesh. And then I'm going to put my spirit on you. And that's the process. That's what God does. So yes, we are here and we want to disciple our kids. Obviously, that's something that is important. We're not just going to be like, okay, well, I got nothing to do.
Yeah. God, you do it.
We are here to come alongside them, to point them to the person that is Jesus Christ, to show them that God is real and loves them and welcomes their questions. So there's a book that I've been reading recently called Families and Faith, and it is a 35-year study. So this is a long study that they did before they drew any conclusions. And they talked to every generation that was alive every 5 years, and they talked to them about, you know, where your faith is at. And it wasn't just like evangelical Christians. There was like Mormons in this. There was Jewish people. There were people who were not of any faith. So it was a really interesting spread of people. And what they found is that the more a family liked to be together, they call it family warmth, the more likely it was that the parent's faith transferred into the child.
Wow.
So having those good conversations, loving each other, playing games together, those movie nights, going sledding or hiking together, those things are all actually part of what we're doing because we're building up that family warmth.
Oh, I love that.
It's amazing.
Yeah, that is so good. And it makes it a lot more fun.
Yeah, absolutely. Then we can get out of this mindset of I must teach them all the things. And we can really get alongside that coaching mindset. Like, I'm with you on this journey, and we're going to have fun together. We're going to explore who God is and what the Bible is like. So it really does take the pressure off.
Yeah.
I think. Well, and in some ways it puts pressure on because people who had really bad relationships with their parents, it made them a lot more likely to rebel. So in some ways that is pressure, but in some ways it's not.
Yeah. That probably has to be started early. Because once they get to the point of rebellion, then you've lost all that opportunity to have that good communication early.
So that's why I talk about like cultivating that soil. That's what we're doing. We're making the soil of their heart hopefully soft so that God can do his thing. In the end, though, it's not 100% under our control.
Yeah.
And we have to be okay with that. We have to just let that go. We can't live in the fear that the world will snap up our child or that they're going to turn away. If we live in the fear like that, we are going to be like, okay, you need to know this right now, and you need to make a decision right now. And that kind of pressure actually is what causes kids to turn away. Yeah. In a lot of cases.
Yeah. Oh, that's so good. You are very wise. Very wise.
Some of it I've learned from a lot of other wise people.
Yeah. Isn't that the truth? Isn't that the truth? You have a really, really neat ministry, and I absolutely love the name. I just love the name. And it is Little Shoots, Deep Roots. Can you tell me about how that came about and what's your main focus of your ministry and where that's going?
You know, when I renamed the ministry, it used to just be under my name, which was super boring. Christie Thomas.
That's a cute name. I like it.
It's a fine name, but I really wanted the ministry to be something that kind of, when you look at the words, you can get a word picture in your mind and you're thinking, oh, what does that mean? So the Little Shoots, Deep Roots means little shoots. So it has kind of a twofold meaning. The little shoots obviously refers to our children, but it also refers to these little tiny habits that if you look at all the habit research that's coming out now, it's the little things in our lives, the little habits that are in our lives that make the big difference because they're sustainable and they add up over time. So I believe that those little shoots, those little habits that we're implementing into our days on a regular basis, those are what God uses to grow these deep faith roots in our kids. It's not the once a month, okay, guys, we forgot to do like a family devotional, so we're going to sit down for an hour together and we're going to sing, we're going to do all the things. Those are not the things. I mean, those may have an impact. God can use anything, right? But those are not the things that have the greatest long-term impact. These little things that we're doing in our days. So for example, I've been doing some coaching recently, which has been a real blast. And I've talked to a few moms who wanted to have like some Bible memory in their day. So one of them is doing it in the car on the way to school. Very specifically, as they drive down their long driveway, they're doing Bible memory verse. And if you think about if she is able to continue that, which you probably will be able to because it's quite easy. Imagine her daughter, actually it's her granddaughter, she's raising her granddaughter. Imagine her granddaughter in 20 years, leaving her grandma's house, driving down the driveway and thinking of all the verses that they memorized together, or maybe just memorizing her own verse. Or these, another mom is doing some Bible memory with her little boys as they wait for the bus. So they're standing at the end of the road, they are waiting for the bus and they're practicing a Bible verse together. And then they give each other all these super high fives. Mom's like, my hand's getting red. These super high fives. They love that. And just imagine that in the future, if they continue doing that, not only will they have all these scriptures in their hearts, but they're waiting for the bus. Maybe they're like 45 years old and they're waiting for the bus and suddenly this memory is going to come up. Not a school bus, obviously, but like they're waiting for a city bus and they're like, oh yeah, remember those verses? And some of those are going to percolate back to the top.
Right.
I love that these little habits, they're so easy to do and they can have these huge long-term impacts.
Yeah.
So I've been doing this one with my kids for 13 and a half years. So since my oldest was born, we prayed about like a biblical blessing over him at bedtime. So a lot of people do this, something like the one from Numbers where it says, may the Lord bless you and keep you, may he make his face shine upon you and be gracious to you, may he turn his face towards you and give you peace. Sweet. And that is just something so simple. I mean, it took me 10 seconds to say that. It's very easy to get into your day and it becomes something that's really meaningful between you and your child. You're praying God's blessing over them every night, which of course is going to have an impact. But then it also becomes this meaningful connection between you and your child. You're leaving them not on an angry note, slamming the door and go to sleep already.
Yeah.
You're
leaving in your bed.
You
exactly. Can't have more water.
Exactly. So you're leaving. So this is helping with that family warmth too, right? You're leaving them with this positive memory of you speaking scripture over them. And you can, so what I've been doing recently is speaking different verses over them as well. And they actually are, just from me speaking them over them, they're actually starting to memorize these verses. Wow. Totally unintentional.
Wow.
But these things they just kind of grow in your hearts and minds. And I just love seeing how these so super simple things that people would be like, that's not enough. They're actually what God uses. And that's, hey, you look in the Bible and how often does God use something small and weak to do his will? Like every time. Yeah. Right? Yeah. You look at Gideon's army when God's like, nope, smaller, 300 people against 300,000. Perfect.
Yeah. We want to know who's really doing the work here. It's not the army, it's God. Yeah.
Yeah. And that's the beauty of the small things is that you're right. I mean, it reminds us that it's actually God doing the work. It's not about me trying to impart all the things.
Yeah. That is so good. So it sounds like you have a multifaceted ministry going on. You've written lots of books. You've written picture books, the little Quinn series, the little owl, and you've written the Fruit of the Spirit book, which reminds me that I would like to have you back to talk about that on another day. So today we're talking about boys and the book.
Got it here.
Oh, there we go. Okay. So the mother and son prayer journal. So, so do you have devotionals in that book? Are there devotionals?
So it's kind of a multifunctional book.
Yeah, multifaceted. That's great.
So each one, so there's 52 of them. So you could do it once per week or a few times a week, but each one starts out with a question that you ask your son. So what to you is the hardest part about praying? And you don't just ask him. I say in the beginning of the book, you need to ask each other this. So your son gets to ask you, what is the hardest part about praying for you? And some of these questions are things like, let me see. Tell me about a time when something felt really unfair. So they're not all like spiritual type questions. Or have you ever pretended to be fine when you were actually really upset? But so that you have this conversation and it leads you into this devotional, which is on the life or the writings of David. So the one, what to you is the hardest part about praying, leads us into one of the Psalms. So we're talking about one of the Psalms. And then at the end of it, so it's not very long. They're like 300 words. They probably take about 3 minutes to read, depending on how fast you talk. It takes me 2 I talk fast. And then there's a really simple little prayer thing that you can do with your son. Now, there is space to write it down for your son to write it down. I have a couple of boys that don't really like to write, or they didn't when I did this
Right.
book
I
with
don't
them.
think most
So
boys like to write.
no, so I just said, you tell me what you would say, and I'll just write it down so that we don't forget.
Yeah.
So like we just take the pressure off. Like this is not a big deal.
Right.
And some of them are actually drawing ones too. Let's see. So this one, there's one here. Draw a comic of someone getting bullied in your school or community. How could you stand up for the kid getting bullied? Well, you ask for God's help. So that's the prayer for that one. And then at the end, after the son's prayer section, there's a mother's prayer section, which is just blank. And then you get to write your prayers for your son. And I found that when I was doing this with my boys, my prayers came fairly easily because we had just talked about something very specific.
Yeah. Yeah. I love it because one of the things that I think parents are missing is being able to do some heart level communication. They're so busy getting their kids to do what they want them to do. They just omit that one-on-one talking, exchanging back and forth. Now that's a mother's prayer journal. Would it be appropriate for a father, or is it really geared toward mothers?
Yeah, you could do it with a father. You could also do it with a daughter. There's actually only one spot in here that I say you're a boy.
Okay.
So you could just change it. It's just that
cross it out and put
this is written because a publisher contacted me, and they're the kind of publisher that writes books targeted to specific keyword searches on the internet.
Oh, okay.
So, and they found this keyword, mother and son prayer journal, that there was no book associated with it. And so they said, can you write that for us? At first I thought it was a scam. And then I realized, oh, this is right. So that's, people often ask me, would you write a mother and daughter one? And I thought, well, there actually is a lot of mother and daughter, like good quality mother and daughter resources out there. But yes, you could definitely do that. You could just scratch that out and say father and son.
Yeah. The important part is the communication, and fathers should be able to communicate with their sons about the same things that mothers communicate. So
100%.
Yeah. I love the communication aspect, and then drawing God into the communication and part of the solution. I think that's just really, really neat. Okay. You mentioned the habit of memorizing scripture. Are there any other little habits that you think about or talk about in your Little Shoots, Deep Roots ministry?
Absolutely. There are lots of little habits.
Okay, you've talked about Bible memorization as habits. What are some of the other habits? I presume there's a few more habits up your sleeve.
Oh, absolutely. For any spiritual discipline, there's a small habit that you can use either to get you going or just as a small habit that remains small. So a lot of people tell me, I want to start reading a devotional regularly. Sometimes we pick it up, but we can't be consistent. So I would say make it really, really, really small. So you want to find, if you want to read a devotional, find the shortest devotional you can possibly find. And I have at least one good recommendation for anybody who's looking for something that doesn't take much time. Basically, you want to take that excuse away from yourself. You want to be able to say, well, it only takes 30 seconds, so I have time for that.
Right.
Even on my busiest days, right? Yeah. If you wanted to read the actual Bible, I would say read one verse. One verse is enough. You could read a proverb, a verse from Psalms. It could be just very simple, because when you take it and make it really small, it makes it a lot easier to do. So things that are easier to do are more likely to get done. Like if you asked me to pick up my phone and go on Instagram right now, that would be very easy for me. It would be very likely to get done. If you asked me to do 20 push-ups, there is zero chance of that happening, because that's very hard for me. So the easier you can make something, the more likely it is to actually get done. So just make it shorter. Decrease the expectations. It seems funny that decreasing the expectations would work, but it does every time.
You decrease the expectations and you increase the results.
Yes, exactly.
It's kind of
lower the bar.
Yeah, that's really good. Any others?
Oh yeah. So if, let's say you wanted to pray, maybe you want to get a prayer habit going. You can start by just saying something like, hey, what was good about your day? Let's talk to God about that. Sometimes I use this kind of 2-part one where we say, God, today I liked, and then we say, God, today I didn't like, and that's it. And it makes it easier for kids to know what to say, because one of the problems with prayer is that we often just don't know what to say, right? So it just makes it very simple. It doesn't take very much time. You can also make it fun. One of my sons really likes what he calls a passing prayer. So I hold the stuffed animal and I say something, and then I pass the stuffed animal to him, and then he says something, and then we just pass it back and forth. So making it easy because it's fun, So it doesn't necessarily have to be super short, but if it's fun, it's also easier to get in.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh, that's such a good idea. Can I keep asking more?
Yeah.
You have any other ideas? I just love this part, all the real practical tools.
Well, let me see. I mean, those are all very simple. Oh, let's talk about worship. So let's say you wanted to get worship into your day more consistently. This is something that I'm working on right now. I haven't developed any little habits around it yet, but I probably should take my own advice. But you could do something like, when you get into the car, you turn on the Christian radio station or your favorite, whatever. You buckle your seatbelt, and that's what you do. You just turn it on. That becomes the habit. It's hard for that's not working for me because we always listen to audiobooks in the car, but that works for a lot of people. I've heard a lot of people say, I turn it on for myself, and then I hear my kids kind of singing along. You can say, while I'm making lunch, I turn on worship music. So if another aspect of this that makes it actually more likely to get done is that you connect it with something that you're already doing in your day. So instead of saying, I really want to turn on worship music, that's the end of that, right? It's not going to happen, or it might happen once in a while. If you want it to be consistent, you have to connect it with something you're already doing consistently. And we might think, well, I'm not very consistent. Well, you always eat lunch.
Yeah.
Well, you always eat meals. You always get in the car or wait for the bus. You always tuck your kids in, or like there's always something that you're doing regularly, giving your kids a bath or reading read alouds or something, brushing your teeth. Exactly. There's always those times. And you just have to think creatively about, how can I implement a small habit in that day? So maybe while you're brushing your teeth, you sing Jesus Loves Me to your 2-year-old while you're brushing their teeth. How easy would that be, right?
Right.
Or let me think. So I think we talked about doing that in the car or at brushing your teeth. At bath time, you can turn on music, or you can be singing little songs to your child. That wouldn't work with a 13-year-old, but it would work with a little one. And sometimes you just have to, as your kids get older and you're no longer bathing them or no longer driving them, then you have to shift your habits. But when you think of making it easy and connecting it with something you're already doing, it becomes a lot easier to get in.
It's so good. So good. So speaking of a preschooler versus an older child that may be preteen, we need to connect with them differently, as you just said. I really like that. So how do you see connecting differently? What are some of the different tools that you might use differently?
Well, I would say there's less like direct teaching with my older ones, and more, let's talk about this, let's ask questions together, try to do a lot more discussion and less like, okay, let's read the Bible story. They sometimes will open up more if we're eating, or if we're going for a walk, or if we're driving together and they're in the seat beside me. That's the nice thing about older kids, is they actually can sit beside you.
Yes, that's true.
You're not a taxi anymore. That's a good question. So sometimes it's actually not that much different, because preschoolers are squirmy and they need to be engaged, and preteens also need to be engaged, right? It's just kind of the way that you do it. But so preschoolers, what I love about preschoolers is that it's all new to them. They don't know the Bible stories yet. So you're telling them the story of Elijah and Mount Carmel, and they're like, oh, what? Or I remember my little guy was like, oh, that's Jesus. And when he finally figured out the manger had Jesus in it. Wow. Well, that's not that exciting to a 12-year-old.
No.
Like, I know that stuff already.
Yes.
So there's less of that like initial discovery with preteens. But the nice thing about preteens is that you can talk about those deeper issues, that you can talk about metaphorical ideas like the fruit of the Spirit, and they actually understand it because their brains are ready for that. Yeah. So I love that you can have those deeper conversations with them.
Yeah. And maybe you can have more application. You can take the shorter story, and then you can apply it to how it would mean something to them.
Absolutely. I love that as well.
Yeah. That's great. Okay. This is a tough one. This is a tough one, because we are in a culture right now that I would say fights against biblical principles in so many ways. And raising kids right now, we want to raise them to love God and God's word. And so how do you deal? What was my question? Oh, yeah. So how do you deal with a culture that's opposed to biblical principles in many cases? Do you have thoughts?
Yeah, I think Some of my original thoughts are just that can be really scary, and we can be really tempted to live in fear of that. And I see that in a lot of family discipleship books, that we have to be so careful because the world's going to snatch our kids away. We have to develop that firm foundation. And a lot of it comes from a place of being afraid of the culture.
Mm-hmm.
And so I don't really believe in living in fear of that. Obviously, that's not where I want my kids to walk, but I don't think that God calls us to live in fear of that. Like, if Daniel had lived in fear of the culture, he wouldn't have been Nebuchadnezzar's right-hand man, right? He was just like, I'm just doing my thing. I will work in this as far as it works for me. But I am still clearly different. So I keep an eye open. We talk about things sometimes if they come up. But I really think that God tells us not to be afraid. I read recently that he tells us not to be afraid 365 times in the Bible. Like,
once a day.
How clear is that? There's a do not be afraid for every day. And living in fear, I think, can damage our relationship with our kids, because when we're afraid, we try to control. And so if I'm trying to control my kids, no, you can't do that. No, you can't do that. No, you can't do that. Like, the world's going to get you. We're living in fear of the future. Then that is going to hurt that relationship that we're building with our kids. And like I said earlier, they discovered that relationship itself is actually really key. So we need to, okay, God's got this. It's all right. So, I mean, and on one hand, it doesn't come up super often right now in our family because we are homeschooling. Now, that's actually not why I chose homeschooling. It just kind of, it's a convenient side effect, I guess. But our kids were in public school for a while. And so we would talk about some things like, oh, there's a kid in your class that is like, there is no God. What do we believe about that?
Right.
So I just,
you just, they can open the conversation. You can just talk about it. And yeah,
I think so. I mean, there are probably things that I do that 20 years ago, my parents probably were horrified about maybe some of the things that I do or believe or don't believe. And 20 years ago, my parents would have gone, oh my goodness, she's an apostate. But now we realize, oh, it actually wasn't that big of a deal.
Yeah.
And actually, you can still be a Christian and do these things, like, for me, like reading Harry Potter or something, when that first came out, that was a big deal. And for some families, that's still a big deal. And that's kind of a kind of thing. Right. But for me, it didn't make me want to do magic.
Right.
It didn't make me believe in it. I knew it was fantasy and it was imaginary.
Yes. Sort of like the Wizard of Oz. We grew up with the Wizard of Oz, but there were, witches and sorts of things. So yeah.
That's true. And you probably didn't believe that you could actually go to Oz. And
no, I didn't. And I was didn't really want to.
No, well, no,
I kind of liked home more than venturing out to Oz.
That's true. And I mean, there's nothing wrong with, if you want to not expose your kids to that stuff, there's nothing wrong with that, of course. I'm just saying, when we're afraid of the culture, sometimes we're afraid of things that we actually don't need to be afraid of.
Right.
So we need to just relax.
Yeah.
Let's talk to God about this, about the fear and why we're afraid of this thing.
Yeah.
And I think that's going to help us be better parents.
Yeah. And just raise our kids in getting to know God for who he is and being close to him. And, when we're protected, we don't have to fear what's out there when we know that we're in a safe place, and being close to God is a very safe place.
Yeah. No matter where you are, even if you're making movies in the most secular place in the world, or if you move to Iran or wherever you are, being with God is safest, maybe not physically safest, but the safest place to be.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. Yeah. I like that. I like your approach. So you interact with a lot of parents, especially with your coaching and all now. And so you must see some parents who are very frustrated and they don't understand their sons and they don't understand how to deal with certain situations. What do you have to say to that parent?
Bring it to God, like, all the time. I pray so much. Pray for yourself, for patience. I'm always praying for patience with my kids. Pray for insight. Pay attention to your son. There've been a lot of times when I've been frustrated with one of my boys and not really understand why are you doing this? Like, this drives me crazy. but I can take it to God, and he's the one who knows what's going on inside them. So it's not like he's going to, sometimes he does, he kind of downloads something into my brain like, oh, and then you go, okay, I understand my son better now.
Mm-hmm.
But also when I'm talking to God, he's giving me grace for myself and for them.
Mm-hmm.
And he helps me to parent them better out of
Mm-hmm.
his kind of love for my child, instead of just this sense of frustration, like, oh, I'm not in control and I gotta fix my son. So when we're
Yeah.
talking to God, that's just, every time somebody asks me that, I'm like, I know it's not a cop out. You pray, we say, just pray about it. Well, it's actually not a cop out. It is the most powerful thing that we can do.
Yes. Yes. And I found that looking to the way that God parents us, he parents us with love and kindness.
Yeah.
And that is to be able to pass that on to our kids is, I think, a really good way to, I'm not saying that right. To be able to pass that on to our kids is just really a strong way to be able to be less frustrated and be more hopeful. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Christie, this has been so, so good. And you are just such a wealth of knowledge and insight and wisdom. And I just really, really appreciate that. Do you have some final words that you wanted to share with our listeners?
Sure. Well, let's talk a little bit more about, we're talking about boys today, right? So I
Yeah.
think one of the things that you really need as a parent is you'll need perseverance to
Oh,
just keep on when they won't stop climbing on everything in sight, when the rocks in his pocket bang up your washing machine, when there's a whoopee cushion that has melted to the side of your dryer, when there are sticks and grass and autumn leaves all over your freshly mopped floor, and when they just won't stop talking about Minecraft, you are going to need perseverance to really get to know your son. We just, as parents, we can't become offended when they won't share their problems. We're going to just need to find ways to climb over those walls and into their hearts. But our best teammate on the journey of raising our boys, of raising our girls, is God. He's the only one who can fill us with unconditional love, grace, patience, and perseverance on those really hard and messy and noisy days. So when you're feeling unloving and graceless and impatient and want to just completely give up and go hide in the bathroom, just give it to God and let him give you what you need. Only then are you going to be able to give your son, your daughter, your grandson what he needs most from you.
Mm-hmm. Oh, that's so good. So, so good. What great way for us to close this interview with words that will just give us strength to keep on keeping on.
Mm-hmm.
That's so good. Okay. Well, Christie, I just thank you so much. Will you provide for me some links to your books and things, and I'll leave those in the show notes. And also, I think that you had something you wanted to share with the listeners today that might help them in their journey. What can you describe that?
Absolutely. So I have a free download on my website called the Start Little Guide. So if this resonated with you and you thought, oh, I want to do some of those little things and make this faith formation simple and sustainable, I have a guide called the Start Little Guide. It gives you a bunch of different ideas of little tiny things that you can do, ideas for when you could fit them into your day, and also a little bit of the science behind the habit formation. So you can download that. I will give you the link, Lori.
Okay. So we'll leave that link in the show notes and you can download that guide. And I know that it's going to be helpful to all of you. So Christie, thank you so, so much for giving us your time today and your wisdom. And I really look forward to getting together again and talking about that Fruit of the Spirit book.
Me too. Thanks.
That'd be great. Okay, you have a wonderful Christmas season, and we will be in touch with you again, and we will leave all this good information for our listeners to get in touch with Christie. So be sure to check out the show notes. Thank you, Christie. We'll see you again soon.
We will. Bye.
Bye.